There's a pattern in your life that you've already identified. You've seen it. Maybe you've named it. And maybe you've journaled about it and talked about it with others and done real work around it. Different relationship, same dynamic. Different opportunity, same hesitation. Different chapter, same ceiling. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you've started to wonder if this is just how your story is going to go or goes. And here's what that thought is actually telling you. It's not telling you that the pattern is permanent. It's telling you that you're still standing inside of it. And there's a specific structural reason that you cannot see your own pattern clearly. And it has nothing to do with how smart or how intelligent you are. It has nothing to do with your effort or your awareness. Because here's the thing, you cannot diagnose the pattern that you live inside. And not because you're not looking, because from the inside, it doesn't look like a pattern. It looks like reality, your history, your personality, the way things just tend to go for you. And you cannot change what you cannot observe from the outside of it. You see, because awareness is not the same as having an external view. And that distinction is the entire difference between seeing your pattern and being free of it. Now, I want to illustrate this, and I want to draw this out here on the board. So we have one circle here. Then we have an arrow that goes into the middle circle. Then we have another arrow that goes into the third circle. And then this first circle gets looped back into the third circle. Now, this is not a metaphor. This is a structural architecture of every repeating pattern in your life, where you have 3 nodes and then a closed loop. So it starts here, then you have 2 other circles that go into, and then here, this gap here is important. We're going to cover this here in a second. This is an entire loop of how your patterns are running. And everything here is self-reinforcing. So every time that a loop is running, it gets stronger. Just think about it. That thought that triggered that action, now it feels more like it's a fact. And the result becomes your evidence. And your evidence becomes your belief. And your belief generates the same thought. You see, you're not experiencing life. You're running a loop that you built, and you've never been able to step outside of it long enough to see it. Now, that's not a character assessment. That's an architectural one. And I work with a lot of different entrepreneurs, creators, founders, high achievers, and one of the biggest things that I noticed is a lot of patterns that are keeping these individuals from getting their desired outcome, their desired reality. And it's because they're not able to step outside of themselves and see themselves clearly from a third person perspective and observe that they have a specific pattern that is keeping them stuck and that is running unconsciously. And here's the thing. A lot of times these individuals that are very successful already in their own right, they can see the patterns in others. But when it comes to actually having a mirror be reflected back to them, what they're running, it has been a challenge for them because they just simply cannot step outside of themselves and objectively see, right? Because we have our own biases. And so it's important to realize those biases and that it's very difficult to see your own patterns. But today, here in this video, you're going to learn exactly how to be able to diagnose those patterns that are keeping you stuck and keeping you exactly where you are and not getting you your desired reality, your desired outcomes. So here's what we're covering today. First thing is why you can't see your own patterns. Because oftentimes we think that awareness of something, of a behavior, of an action is enough for us to see the pattern, but it's not typically the case. And then number 2, the self-reinforcing loop architecture. This is the 4-node chain that keeps every pattern, that keeps repeating, running, and why it feels permanent, and how over time it just becomes invisible and you're not able to see it. And then the third thing that we're going to go over is the reactor, observer, architect. This is the 3 levels of engagement within your own patterns. And we're going to go over what each level can and cannot do, and what it ultimately requires for you to go from reactor to architect. And then number 4, why seeing is not the same as changing. This is where I believe most personal development goes towards in terms of trying to change a behavior, action, or just becoming aware of something that is happening. And being aware of it is just the first step, but changing it is a completely different ballgame. And then number 5, we're going to go over the break system. This is a 5-step system for interrupting and redesigning the current patterns that are running as your reality, starting from exactly where you are. Okay, so let's fill these out here. So the first one here is a thought. You have an initial thought, then this goes into action. Then you get a result here, and then this creates a belief. And this belief goes back into your thought. So it all starts with the initial thought that is sitting above the belief, because the belief is under. So you think about the belief being down here, okay? Under the actual thought itself, where you have the thought up here, okay? This is like the surface level, the thought. The belief that's running underneath it, this is really what's driving that thought, because when you think about it, a belief comes from somewhere, from some experience, from some place, from somebody who told you something, and maybe you learned about it through society, or maybe through your family, through your environment. Somebody told you something about how you should see the world, or how things are and how things should be, and then you took that in as a belief because you did not know any better. And so now your thinking and your thoughts are sitting on top of the beliefs that are running those thoughts in the first place. So it's important to understand that your brain is not just putting out random outputs. It produces outputs that are consistent with the patterns that are running underneath your conscious thinking, right? Just as I mentioned here, your thought is above, and your belief, your conscious thinking, okay, has this belief here that is governing your conscious thinking, okay? You have a certain belief about money, about experiences, about significant others, about how the world works, about how people are successful and others are not. And all of those different things factor into your thoughts and how you think about the world. Just think about it. A thought arrives that is shaped by a belief that you never fully examined. Then the action follows that is consistent with that thought, and the results confirm that belief. And so the loop reinforces itself until it feels like it's a natural order of things. So a pattern essentially equals an automatic thinking loop, because you don't notice patterns. You operate from them. You're not observing this loop from outside of it. You're thinking from inside of it. And the thoughts that it produces feel like your own thoughts. And the interpretations feel like a real and accurate reading of reality. And this goes into statements that a lot of people will make in terms of, this is just who I am. This is just my situation. And this always happens to me. And you see, these feel like facts. And a lot of it has to do with because you have accepted this, but it's really ultimately behind the fact that you have not been able to see those patterns and you're thinking from them. And so ultimately what those 3 types of statements are is that they are repeated interpretations. Because what you oftentimes will call reality is often just a pattern that's been running long enough to feel like it's permanent. And the longer that it runs, the more real that it feels. And the more real that it feels, the less visible it actually becomes. Because it's like you're digging yourself deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And then you realize that you're in so deep, you're in too deep, that you don't even see a way out. And for most people, oftentimes they're aware of what's happening. Like something is going on and it's not getting me the results, the outcomes that I'd like. But a lot of times it has to do with just them being aware of it. And awareness does not equal change. You can't just change something because you're aware of it and you acknowledge it, you notice it. There needs to be something that changes in terms of mentally, physically, emotionally, even spiritually, for you to be able to make that change actually happen. Because maybe you are super aware of this pattern. Like you know that you do X, Y, and Z. And it happens all the time when this situation arises or when this type of event happens, you always react this certain way. And so what I want to give you is a 3-level evolution in terms of how you are seeing that particular pattern and how you can evolve into becoming an actual architect from being somebody who's just reacting to that pattern. So level 1 is the reactor. This person lives in the pattern. They react automatically. They don't even have awareness of it. Like think about different people that you know, or just in general, where people are just acting off of impulse, off of unconscious programming, where something happens, they get frustrated, maybe they freak out, maybe they act a certain way, they act out of line, whatever that may be. These people are just not even aware that they're going through and experiencing a specific pattern that is triggering a certain behavior, action, whatever that may be. And then level 2 is the observer. They see the pattern. They understand it. They acknowledge it. So they are super familiar. They have the full awareness. They can see what's going on. Like, hey, I have a problem here. And something's going on here. I keep reacting this way. And so they're very much so aware of the situation. Now, the architect here, this is the most powerful, because architect, they see the pattern, but they also interrupt it. And they redesign it or update it. So think about it. Something's happening and maybe somebody cuts you off. Maybe you get into a fender bender, or maybe somebody says something to you and makes you feel a certain way. And normally you would freak out, or you would, act out or say certain things. But then as an architect, you're able to come to the realization that, hey, something happened here. I'm about to react a certain way. Let me stop this right in the middle of it, interrupt it, and acknowledge how I feel. Maybe you feel a certain way. And that's what's important about it, because you're going to always feel the certain way. That's going to trigger that behavior, that emotion, that feeling, whatever that may be. But it's important for you to, even if you feel it, to acknowledge it and interrupt that pattern and say, hey, you know what? Normally, I'm going to act like X, Y, and Z, how I normally do. However, because I'm the architect, I'm able to stop. I'm able to take a deep breath. I'm able to acknowledge what's happening. And then I interrupt it and then I change it. Okay? I don't act that way. I just acknowledge, and I see myself from the third person perspective, and I say, hey, you or Juan or whoever, I normally act this way, but I'm not going to act this way any longer, because I'm going to change it. I'm going to interrupt it. Okay. This is the deliberate action of changing it, seeing it, acknowledging it, and making sure that you have full control over it. And you can think about these 3 as really like lenses, perspectives. Okay. Think about like a scope. okay? So something like this where I want to illustrate here, you're the reactor, okay? You don't really have a whole lot of room to work with and play with. It's just your visible box, okay, here. And then the observer, you have a bigger box because you realize that this is happening and this is not serving me, not helping me. And then here, you're the architect. Now, it's like infinite. There's no actual box that you're working within because you have the ability to interpret that situation, that pattern, from whatever lens that you choose that is going to be helpful and useful for you, because you're going to interrupt it and you're going to change it, to redesign it, okay? So that's kind of how you want to think about it. And you see, most personal development content, information gets people from 1 to 2, from becoming the reactor to the observer, where they understand and they see the patterns happening. And that's a real shift. And it's very important to even acknowledge that, because when you can start seeing it, that's what starts to move the needle for you. But the ultimate goal here is the architect, someone who can actively see the loop, interrupt it, and redesign the architecture that's producing it. So ultimately, what I want you to understand here is that you don't break patterns by seeing them, by becoming aware of them. You break them by redesigning them. Okay, so I've erased the board. So now let's jump into the break pattern interruption system. So let me write this out here. Break pattern interruption system. This is an acronym. And so this is 5 steps here. And this one has each individual step that moves you one layer further outside the loop that's been running as your reality. This is how you're able to go to the architect and be able to redesign and interrupt the actual pattern. So the first step, B, bring the pattern into awareness. This is where you want to name it and be very specific with it. Now, you don't want to come here and say, hey, I self-sabotage, I do this, I do that. You want to get very specific here, because a specific pattern has a trigger, has a behavior, and a consistent result. Every time a decision involves external visibility, I find a reason to delay, reframe the objective, or reconstruct the framework. You see, that's a named pattern where every time that you are looking to get external visibility, maybe you are invited to go out there and speak on stages or go to networking events, but then when that happens, you find a reason to delay or to put it off or to not even do it at all. And you convince yourself and you give yourself all these different reasons as to why you shouldn't, because of X, because of Y, whatever that may be, that is justifying the reason for not to take action. So remember here, it's about having a very specific loop with a specific trigger and a consistent result, because you cannot interrupt what you haven't named with precision. Step number 2, recognize the loop. What keep repeating? And when? And so once the pattern is named, then you want to map the loop. Remember, we have the loop here, the thought, action, result, belief, that then goes back into the same thought. So the question is, where in that loop does the pattern activate with the most force? Is it the belief underneath the thought, the interpretation of the result, or is it the action that has become automatic? You see, most loops have one high leverage node where the intervention lands the cleanest. And so you want to find that node because this is where the real redesign happens. Step number 3, externalize your thinking. Externalize awareness. Equals real-time mirror. Now, here's the problem and the challenge with trying to see the pattern from inside of it. The tool that you're using to look, which is your mind, is the same tool that the pattern is running on. So you need something outside of the system to be able to see it clearly. A coach, a structured reflection practice, or you can use the most powerful mirror that's available today, and that's AI. So being able to use AI as a reflection system, as a mirror to see that pattern, where you can go to Claude, you can go to GPT, and you can ask it and say, hey, here's the pattern that I believe is running right now. Here's the loop as I've mapped it. What am I not seeing from inside of it? You see, this gives you something that humans have never ever had before. And that's a real-time mirror of your own thinking that operates completely outside of the loop that you're currently in. So highly recommend that you use AI to help you map this pattern and to externalize it and to see it actually for what it is. Step number 4, you want to alter the response. One different response interrupts the loop. Because you see, this is the leverage point. Not change everything, not redesign the entire operating system in one move. It's about one different response at the exact moment that the loop would normally activate. So think about it. You have the belief that activates, the familiar thought arrives, and the default action begins to form. And at that exact moment, you choose differently. Not because it feels natural yet, because it doesn't, and it's not supposed to. But you do it because you know and you understand that choosing differently, even once, is evidence to the operating system that the loop is no longer the only available response. Step number 5, last step. K. You want to keep reinforcing the new pattern. Because the consistency of the new response equals new identity. You see, this final step here is the one that ultimately determines whether this brake system produces a temporary interruption or a permanent redesign. Because just one altered response doesn't change the operating system. You need to have consistent altered responses that are chosen deliberately with intention every time that the loop would have fired. You see, that is what rewrites the belief that is generating that pattern, not through insight, through behavioral evidence accumulated over time. The subconscious OS updates based on what you consistently do and not on what you understand. So let's quickly recap this. So the first step is we want to bring the pattern into awareness. We want to recognize the loop. We want to externalize your thinking. You want to alter the response, and you want to keep reinforcing the new pattern so it becomes permanent change. So ultimately, you don't escape the patterns. You interrupt them, and then you replace them with a new design. And this is really important here. It's really critical that you understand that it needs to happen. The stop needs to happen in terms of the interruption right at the moment that it would naturally normally fire. And doing that consistently is what's going to create that change and what's going to rewrite that pattern. Because what happens is it starts to slowly lose its power every time you consistently interrupt it and reframe it and change it. So remember, it's not just about becoming aware of the pattern and seeing it. You need to change it right as it's happening. You want to interrupt it and choose a different outcome, a different action, activity, result, whatever that may be in terms of when you stop and interrupt it. You want to change that so that it no longer takes control of you and loses its power, so that you're able to remove that pattern once and for all.